Part 140. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Zhu. Chapter 1393. The luck of the two teenagers was very bad. In the end, it was Chi-Heiran who walked around the forest for a long time with the dagger in his hand before catching a rabbit. Fan Zijian was about to faint from hunger, and complained, "Didn't you say that there are a lot of game in the mountains? Every time you go hunting, you can catch a lot of game. Why did it take half a day to get a hare this time?" Chi-Heiran said angrily, "It's not because there is little game in this mountain forest. Although I don't have a bow and arrow, my kung fu is there. Even if I encounter a wild boar, I can take it down. But it's hard for a clever woman to cook without rice. There is no prey in it. You let it go, where am I going to call?" Fan Zijian believed it was true, and he stopped complaining, but said, "Then next time we will find a forest with a lot of prey to stay." Chi-Heiran was stunned, and asked, "Aren't we going to buy dry food? Will it be a waste of time to hunt and eat every day?" Fan Zijian tilted his head and thought for a while, then said, "It's not good to eat dry food all the time. Next time we meet a town, we can buy some dry food, and then buy a bow and arrow. We can also buy some wild game on the way." Chi-Heiran nodded numbly. He really wanted to tell Zijian that hunting was not that simple. In the past, he went hunting with his friends. They were all led by experienced guards, and the area was marked in advance. There were many of them, and they would startle the prey on horseback. He does have the ability to hit prey, but he doesn't have the ability to find prey. Chi-Heiran already vaguely knows that for hunters, finding prey is more important than hunting. He numbly gnawed at the hare in his hand, thinking, next time he meets the market, he should buy more dry food, so as not to encounter this situation again. After Fan Zijian finished eating the hare, he wiped his mouth with a handkerchief, and immediately frowned, "I'm thirsty." Chi-Heiran looked around. "I didn't notice any water just now, why don't we look around while walking?" Fan Zijian felt that his throat was a little uncomfortable, but he still nodded. But they didn't find any water until the evening. Fan Zijian was sick, and Chi-Heiran's throat was a little smoked. He said in a hoarse voice, "Why don't we go into the mountains to look for it? Animals always need water, right? May be found." Fan Zijian saw that the setting sun was almost gone, and the sky was getting darker. Looking at the mountain forest standing there quietly, like a mountain forest with its mouth open, he shook his head repeatedly, "No, the mountains are too dangerous. We used to go hunting in the mountains, and the guards didn't say not to spend the night in the mountains lightly." This was a correct decision, because as soon as it was dark they heard the howling of wolves in the mountains. Fan Zijian leaned against Chi-Heiran and trembled, "It's a good thing you didn't go into the mountains, otherwise no matter how strong your martial arts are, you won't be able to punch them. The enemy has 4 legs, not to mention protecting me." Chi-Heiran rubbed his stomach and said harshly, "We must buy more dry food next time we encounter a town." Fan Zijian also nodded sympathetically. Apart from having a normal meal in the morning, they had no water for the roasted rabbit at noon, and they didn't even have to eat the hare at night. The next day, Chi-Heiran was the first to wake up. The 2 horses had already gnawed grass. He yawned and put Fan Zijian, who was leaning on his arms, on the ground. He patted their necks affectionately, then he looked at the wet hands in amazement, and after a while he glanced thoughtfully at the forest on the side. It turns out that there is no water on the ground, and they can still drink the dew that falls from the sky. When Fan Zijian woke up, Chi-Heiran was leisurely collecting dew with a big leaf. When he saw his little friend wake up, he waved happily, "Come here and rustle." Fan Zijian walked up to him and looked at him for a while, took the big leaf he handed over, drank the water in one gulp, and said, "Still rinsing your mouth, is there a lot of water? We have to leave quickly. My mother must have noticed that I was missing last night, maybe come back and chase us." Fan Zijian said in grief and indignation, I plan to go all out on the first day, so as to completely leave the pursuers behind. Who knows? Who would have known that they would die before they set out, and they would be stymied by mere food and water? Chihayran touched his nose. Then let's go. The two teenagers continued on the road hungry, but the Fan family in the capital fell out because of them. Xiaotong was the first to discover her son's disappearance. It's normal for her son not to go home for a day. He either went out to relax or went to play with Heiran. He had just passed the scholar exam, and he might have gone to a classmate's banquet, so she didn't take it seriously. In the evening, her son didn't come back for dinner, and she didn't think too deeply, but she started asking people to look for it, and then accidentally found Yanmo, who had been knocked out in the study. Yanmo is Fan Zijan's personal servant, and he has been with him since he was 6 years old. He takes care of Fan Zijan and Chihayran by himself. It is very useful. The two children take him almost everywhere. This time Xiaotong felt that something was wrong, and immediately led someone into his son's room, and found that there was nothing missing in his room. Yanmo, who was still awake, pointed at the wardrobe tremblingly and said, young master, put money, the box is gone." Xiaotong immediately remembered what her son asked her 2 days ago, whether to go with him or stay. She only felt that a corner of her heart had collapsed, and she staggered a few times before she stabilized her figure. A flash of inspiration flashed in her mind, and she said eagerly, "Quick, go to Qi's mansion to see if young Master Biao is here." Qi Heiran has always lived in Fan's mansion, and only after Qi Feng expressed his dissatisfaction would he return to Qi's mansion for 2 days, but this time he stayed for a particularly long time, and he didn't come back for 7 or 8 days. Xiaotong originally wanted to wait for the news at home, but thinking of Qi Feng's temperament, he couldn't help but brought someone to Qi's mansion to check. It was already dark at this time, and Xiaotong made such a big fuss, it was hard for Fan Siwen not to know, but he was not worried about Fan Zijan. On the contrary, he was a little annoyed, thinking that he was fighting against him because of the matter of kindness, so he snorted angrily, "The number of favors is determined by me. I will give it to whoever I say. In order to grab this quota of graces, he will do everything possible. Tell me to go on, don't worry about him, wait until he eats up outside, the bitterness will come back naturally." The housekeeper responded and left, so no one in the entire Fan mansion looked for Fan Zijan except Xiaotong and her servants. This also gave great convenience to the two teenagers who ran away from home. Qi Feng's thoughts coincided with Fan Siwen's, and he felt that there was no need to look for it at all. The outside was so chaotic and complicated, how could it be possible that two teenagers could make a living just by saying it? He felt that after they had suffered so much, they would naturally understand that it was better to be at home, and they would naturally come back when the time came. Xiaotong, who was sure that Qi Heiran was also missing, only felt that the sky was falling. She knew the two children best, but they were so arrogant that they would definitely not turn around and admit defeat. The two children are so young and the outside is so chaotic, what if they are cheated? They have never been under the care of people since they grew up, and Zijan even wears clothes made of ink, so what if they are hungry and cold? It's a pity that the city gate was closed at that time. Even though she was so anxious, she had no choice but to wait for the city gate to open. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1394. Xiaotong returned home and saw Fan Siwen taking Fan Zixiao's homework exam as if nothing had happened. She suddenly felt chilled, gave their father and son a cold look, turned around and went back to the house. Fan Siwen was a little uncomfortable. He had been waiting for Xiaotong to make trouble with him, and was even prepared to be beaten, but seeing her so calm, he was inexplicably uneasy. After thinking about it, Fan Siwen let Fan Zixiao leave and went to find Xiaotong by himself. But the main courtyard has been closed, and the gatekeeper said to him through a door, "Master, Madam said she is not feeling well, Why don't you go to Aunt Liu's to rest tonight? Fan Siwen's face was blue and red. This was the first time Xia Tong pushed him outside. He was so angry that he walked away, but he still didn't go to Aunt Liu's place, but went to the study. Fan Siwen thought for a long time, and finally found the butler, and said, "As soon as the gate of the city opens tomorrow, you will ask people to go out to chase the young master. Most of them will go to the barracks to find the two uncles of the Zhu family, or they will run after the big cousin. And go, you split into two ways to chase." Fan Siwen felt that he had explained to Xia Tong, so he pulled the quilt over and went to sleep. However, Xia Tong didn't close her eyes all night. As soon as the curfew ended, she asked people to wait at the gate of the city, and asked them to chase in two ways. But Fan Zijian was not a fool either. They had already delayed a day yesterday, and their schedule was slow, so they would definitely be caught up, so he decisively decided to take the trail. As a result, they not only missed the two groups of people who came to chase them, but also escaped the Wu family's pursuit. The two people who were on the road didn't know how lucky they were. Wu Shi didn't take the matter of Qi Heiran running away from home to heart at first. Although Qi Ziyuan's marriage with the Wu family will be postponed, she and Qi Feng are equally confident that Qi Heiran will not be able to bear the hardships outside and come back, and the wedding banquet will be held at that time. She escaped through hardships, knowing how difficult it is to be outside, and also knowing that 2.5 teenagers can hardly live comfortably if they don't have enough money, but who from a young age can bear that kind of hardship. Baidi is too far away from the capital, and there are refugees and robbers on the road. Qi Heiran will always come home one day when he can't stand it. Wu is very confident. So I didn't express any opinion on this matter. How should I live my life or how to live it? The reason why she insisted on putting them to death was that the store sent a new quarter's income, and she locked the retained silver in the box as usual. But she found that her key could not open the lock. Wu tried several times, frowned tightly, thinking that the lock or the key was broken, so she asked someone to pick the lock, planning to change the lock. This closet is for storing some fabrics and infrequently used clothes, and it is rare to open it several times a year, and every time she opens it is when she wants to withdraw money or deposit money. The key to the closet is taken by herself, and the money depositor, even her maidservant, didn't know the place. So one can imagine how shocked and angry Wu Shi was when he saw the empty box. That was more than 50,000 taels, the wealth she had amassed for 12 years. That's right, Qi Heiran thought it was Qi's money, but in fact it was Wu's private money. Wu Shi was a noble concubine when Qi Fengna came in. Her dowry was only 2 boxes, which contained some clothes and cloth, and there was not even 100 taels of silver at the bottom of the box. At that time, the Wu family fled south with the imperial court, and lost a lot of property on the way, and it would cost a lot to re-establish the family business in the capital where every inch of land was expensive. It can be said that the Wu family did not have much dowry when she married into the Qi family, but since Zhu Wan's death, the Wu family has controlled the Qi family. Passing through her hands, withholding a little each time, and embezzling some of the public money, she worked hard for 12 years to save more than 50,000 taels. But the money disappeared under her nose, and Mrs. Wu fainted from anger. The girl outside heard the movement and yelled several times, pushed the door and came in and saw Mrs. Wu fainted on the ground, and panicked. Those who asked for a doctor asked for a doctor, and those who called for a master called for a master. As soon as Wu Shi woke up, she saw Qi Feng, and she couldn't help but shed tears because of her grievances. Qi Feng asked distressedly, "What's wrong with you? The doctor said you were extremely angry. Who made you angry?" Wu Shi opened his mouth, unable to speak at all. Qi Feng knew all the things she brought into the house back then, and although the Wu family has developed a lot in recent years, and some children have become officials, it is impossible to give her so much money. If you tell Qi Feng that she lost so much money, he, without even thinking about it, she understood that she was greedy for the public's money. She could only wipe away her tears and make an excuse. I heard some gossip outside, saying that my stepmother abused my stepson, which forced Heiran to run away from home. Chi Feng frowned, held her hand tightly and said, "Who is so talkative? It's all discussed in private by wives who don't know what's going on outside. Unfortunately, I overheard it. You don't associate with such people in the future. I know that you never care about their brother's affairs in order to avoid suspicion. I just know that you are good in my heart." Wu Shi nodded slowly, leaning on his shoulder and said, "I know, but hearing other people talking like that makes me feel uneasy." Chi Feng patted her on the shoulder reassuringly. He naturally knew about the rumors outside. He was talked about in private, let alone Wu. Wu shirked the matter, but she had to get back the lost money. She knew that this matter could not be investigated with a big fanfare, so she called the wet nurse and her personal maid to visit unannounced. But after checking for most of the day, there is no news at all. Nanny Wu whispered to Mrs. Wu, "Ma'am, it's impossible for girls to steal so much money, and they don't have the guts. The only one in this family who dares to do such a thing is the only one." Wu's complexion changed slightly, "But he hasn't even been in my yard, let alone near my house. How did he steal it?" Mother Wu pondered and said, "After all, Mrs. Zhu has been the housekeeper for many years, and there are always some hidden tricks left behind. Maybe they were ordered to do it." "Ma'am, they expected you to dare not speak up." Wu gritted her teeth, pulled at her handkerchief and said, "Nurse, take someone to search his yard and see if you find anything." Nanny Wu agreed, and searched under the pretext that she wanted to tidy up the room for the fourth young master. Not to mention, she found a lock under the bed that was pinched and deformed by Chi Heiran, and there was a wardrobe missing a lock in Chi Heiran's room. Wu looked at the two locks in front of her, her face turned blue and red, and she said in a hoarse voice after a while, "Go and get the key to the wardrobe in the fourth young master's room." Because Chi Heiran didn't live in Chi's mansion for a long time, he had very few things in the mansion. Therefore, the servants in charge of all kinds of keys in his house had backups, so they didn't have to ask for the keys when he ordered them to get something. Can get it? Wu's power overwhelmed people, and there were only a few clothes in the closet, so Chi Heiran's servants hesitated for a moment before handing over the key. Mrs. Wu used that key to unlock the lock of her closet. "What else is there that I don't understand?" Chi Heiran stole her money and replaced the lock with his. Wu Shi gritted her teeth with hatred, and said in a cold tone, "Since that's the case, don't blame me for being cruel. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1395. Fan Zijin and Chi Heiran stood at the entrance of the town, looking at the disaster victims sitting on the ground in surprise. They scratched their heads, and said doubtfully, "I haven't heard of a disaster in the south of the Yangtze River recently. This is a fairly large town, and there are nearly 200 disaster victims gathered here at the entrance of the town, which can be seen in other places." The two of them frowned and walked in, finding an inn to rest. They didn't sleep well last night, and they didn't have breakfast or lunch today. They were too hungry to walk, so they decided to stay for a day's rest and leave after eating, regardless of the fact that the sun was at noon. Because they have a lot of money, they sleep in the best guest rooms and eat the best meals. After they are full, they remember to ask the waiter, "Why are there so many victims outside? Could it be that there is another flood somewhere?" Drought and flood are the most common natural disasters in the south of the Yangtze River. Drought is impossible this month, but flood is possible. Xiao Er glanced at the two of them, and saw that although their clothes were wrinkled, they were brocades, and the two of them had delicate skin and tender flesh. At first glance, they looked like sons of rich families. People from the south of the Yangtze River came from the Northland, and I heard that last winter Dajin went south to hunt the Grass Valley and burned many villages, and some entire towns were slaughtered. These are refugees who escaped from the Northland. Seeing that the two of them couldn't bear it, Xiao said, "Our place is not bad, after all, it is close to the capital. If you go further north, you will meet more refugees with families and children." I heard from the merchants who came and went. Some refugees were so hungry that they ate human flesh, and when they left Linen Mansion, bandits were rampant, most of them were forced to become bandits. Chi Heiran's eyes widened and he asked, "Don't tell me the court has no countermeasures." Hey, the young master is still counting on the emperor? He even lost half of the country left by his ancestors, and now he is in the capital. How can he care about the lives of the people? Xiao Er wiped his hands and left. Chi Heiran was so angry that he breathed out, "How is the emperor so different from the faint king?" Fan Zijin knew better because he was trained by the master, and said, "In fact, the imperial court has allocated food for relief, although it is not much, but it will not be completely ignored, but the emperor is extravagant, and the officials below are also greedy." The allocated food money started to be corrupted by Prime Minister Qin, and when it was in the hands of the common people, none of it survived, so there were so many refugees who fell into bandits. Then the emperor doesn't care. Fan Zijin said indifferently, "How do you manage it?" He is the biggest corrupt leader. Since the capital was moved to Linen, the palace in Linen has been expanding. The project just finished last year. It is said that the emperor has taken a fancy to the warm soup on Daming Mountain in the western suburbs. To build a palace on it, to keep warm in winter, and to escape the heat in summer, the household department has to pay part of the money, and the other part has to be paid from his internal treasury. Over the years, the emperor has been building a lot and selecting beauties. Do you think he still has money in the internal treasury? How much? Fan Zijin is naturally sensitive to numbers. Although he doesn't know the inside story of the emperor's internal treasury, he has only set his capital in Linen for more than 10 years. As long as he has the heart, he can calculate some, and the cost can be estimated by simply inquiring about the size of the palace. What's more, his father was an official of the Ministry of Households before, so he could always get some news. After making a comprehensive guess, he said, "Part of the relief money went into the emperor's internal treasury, but it was just to find a reason to transfer the money from the Ministry of Households to the internal treasury. He himself is greedy, so naturally he can't control the officials below, otherwise they wouldn't dare to be so blatant near Linen Mansion." Chi Heiran opened his mouth wide, filled with grief and indignation as if blocked by a stone. Could this be his country? Will he be loyal to such an emperor and court in the future? Seeing that his eye circles were red, Fan Zijin sighed slightly, patted his shoulder and did not speak. He was also very sad and confused when he deduced this matter. For a moment, he felt that studying was useless, because even if he entered the imperial examination, he was loyal to such an emperor and such a court. But seeing his father oppressing his mother like this, making his mother and him angry, seeing his uncle insulting Heiran like this, he always felt a fire in his heart, and he couldn't swallow that breath. Both my father and my uncle belong to people who are weak when the enemy is strong, especially my uncle. It's not that Fan Zijin despises him, but from his point of view, my uncle is a mercenary villain. If one day he has more power than him, if he is big, then he must submit to him, and then he will stand up for Heiran and see how he bullies Heiran. With such a goal in mind, Fan Zijin steadfastly studied hard even though he hated it. But now that he ran away from home, it seemed that he was far away from being an official in the imperial examination. Fan Zijin no longer blindly comforted himself, but began to face up to the problems of the empire. Fan Zijin looked at the refugees passing by on the street outside, and Chi Heiran said, "If the imperial court doesn't resettle these refugees, I'm afraid it will lead to a catastrophe." He lowered his voice and said, "Military disaster." Chi Heiran was immediately worried. Fan Zijin patted his head and got up and said, "Okay, no matter what disasters happen in the future, let's take care of ourselves first. After riding for more than a day, my bones are about to fall apart. Let's go by to put on your clothes, come back, take a hot bath and have a good sleep." Chi Heiran nodded thoughtfully, and followed Fan Zijin to the clothing store to choose 2 sets of clothes for a change of clothes. When they came out, they didn't bring anything. It was all kinds of conveniences, but they found all kinds of inconveniences when they went out. The clothes need to be bought new, and the shoes and socks need to be replaced. The 2 teenagers who visited the ready-made clothing store for the first time expressed their mental and physical exhaustion. When the 2 of them finally bought everything and went back to the inn, it was past noon. They called Xiao Er and asked him to prepare 2 buckets of hot water for them to take a bath. Xiao Er stared at the 2 of them with wide eyes, then turned his head to look at the bright sun outside, and asked in surprise, "Now?" Chi Heiran nodded solemnly, "It's now." Xiao Er twitched the corners of his mouth and said, "You 2 young masters, what should you do if you can't sleep in the middle of the day and sleep at night?" The 2 teenagers said that such a thing would never happen. Fan Zijin said seriously, "Master, I can sleep for 3 days in one sleep, do you believe it or not?" Xiao Er suppressed the smile on the corner of his mouth, and said in harmony, "Those 2 are waiting, you are not too busy now, 2 buckets of hot water will be delivered immediately." Fan Zijin nodded in satisfaction, took out a dime from Chi Heiran's pocket and threw it to him, saying, "This is your reward." Xiao Er was overjoyed, bowed again and said, "Just wait, the hot water will be brought to you 2 immediately." After taking a bath, the 2 teenagers immediately spread out on the bed. Fan Zijin kicked Chi Heiran and said, "I'm asleep, so you should be more alert, don't let anyone tie us up or take away our money." Chi Heiran stuffed the oiled paper bag with the banknote under the pillow, turned over sleepily and said, "Don't worry, with me here, who would dare to be a thief?" Fan Zijin fell asleep in peace of mind, and Chi Heiran started snoring after a while. The 2 of them were hungry and tired last night, and they were out in the wild, so they couldn't sleep well at all. Now that they are in a warm inn, they naturally opened their doors to sleep. And when they were sleeping in the dark, the people Xia Tong and Fan Sai Wen sent to find them rushed ahead of them and went all the way north to find them, successfully missing the 2 teenagers. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1396. When Fan Zijin woke up, he felt his throat was dry and he was dizzy. He turned over uncomfortably, opened his eyes slightly, and immediately met the pair of eyes that were hesitant to speak under the bed. Fan Zijin came to his senses in a jerk, sat up suddenly, stared at the man who was tied up and thrown under the bed, subconsciously stretched his hand back, grabbed Chi Heiran's arm and twisted it fiercely. Chi Heiran screamed, patted Fan Zijin's hand away and sat up, and said dissatisfiedly, "What are you doing?" Fan Zijin's throat was so dry and itchy that he couldn't speak, he could only point at the person under the bed and stare at Chi Heiran. Chi Heiran took a look with his head, and immediately lay down without interest, pulled the quilt over his head and said, "Aren't they just 2 little thieves? It's okay, go on sleeping." 2. Fan Zijin's eyes widened, and he glanced around the room, only then did he see a heavily tied person lying beside the table. He rubbed his forehead with a headache, got up and poured himself a glass of water, the discomfort in his throat eased a bit, and then he asked hoarsely, "When did you arrest someone, how come I don't know at all?" Chi Heiran lifted the quilt, and seeing Fan Zijin's "I want to have a long talk with you" look, he knew he couldn't sleep. He got out of bed and kicked the person under the bed, saying, "They were all caught last night. One came in to touch the money, and the other was watching the wind outside." Chi Heiran snorted and said, "Did you learn Kung Fu for nothing?" The money is under Chi Heiran's pillow, if you want to steal it, you have to take it from under his ear, isn't this courting death? Fanzijan took a deep breath, sat on the side of the bed and said, Heiran, I'm sick, you have to call a doctor for me, these two people have to find a way to get rid of them, don't let outsiders know. The two little thieves stared wide-eyed, yelled "Weavua," and looked at the two pleadingly. Fanzijan was taken aback. Seeing that the things stuffed in their mouths were quite strong and the noises they made were not loud, he was relieved. Heiran waved his hand and said, it's almost noon now, you should quickly find a way. Heiran rolled his eyes, made a gesture of wiping his neck and asked, killed? Fanzijan nodded solemnly, we ran away from home, we can't let them find clues, so these two people must be killed. The two little thieves burst into tears, they really just wanted to steal money, they were sent to officials, how could they be silenced? Heiran laughed so hard in his heart, but nodded while touching his chin, okay, we'll go silence after we have lunch. The two little thieves got excited when they heard the words, struggled for a while and suddenly slammed their heads on the floor, making a bang-bang sound. The two teenagers were startled by their desperate actions, but Heiran had quick eyesight and quick hands stopping the movement of the two of them. He threatened viciously, if you make any more noise, I will break your necks. The two of them dared not move immediately. They are habitual thieves and rarely miss. Yesterday I saw two young boys wearing expensive clothes and riding tall horses. They didn't even have any baggage on their bodies. Because there were only two people on the other side, so they did it secretly without calling other people. Who knew that this round-faced boy was so powerful? As soon as his hand reached out and touched the pillow, the other party immediately grabbed and pulled it. Before falling on the bed, he immediately used his hand again. His hands and feet were numb immediately, and he was thrown to the ground speechless. The whole process took only 2 breaths, and there was no sound in the middle. The fair-faced young man who was sleeping outside was still sound asleep, and the companion who watched over him didn't hear anything unusual, so he just watched the round-faced boy take out an oil paper bag from under the pillow and stuff it into his bosom. And then went out to arrest his accomplice. Seeing that the round-faced boy just tied them up, gagged them and left them to sleep, they thought the other party was soft-hearted, and planned to cry the next day, trying to get him to let them go, but who knew that the two of them kept talking. If you don't ask, you will be silenced. They said they were wronged, they really just wanted to steal some money. This crime is not a crime of death, right? Heiran let them go with a cold snort, and looked at Fanzijan. Fanzijan climbed onto the bed slowly, pulled off the quilt to wrap himself up, and said to Heiran seriously, I am really sick, these two people must disappear before the doctor comes, and they cannot be sent to the government, otherwise my parents will be very sad. Soon we'll know we're here. The two little thieves immediately summoned Wu and shouted. Heiran saw that they had something to say, thought for a while and said, Master, take off the cloth towel now, you are not allowed to shout, you also saw Master's tricks last night, although it will be a little slower to stuff things back, but twisting the neck is very fast, just 1 or 2 breaths. The two little thieves nodded with tears streaming down their faces, expressing that they would not make fun of their own lives, and Heiran then tore the things out of their mouths. The two of them did not dare to shout, but lowered their voices and begged, you two young masters, you know where there are good doctors, why don't you let the young one run errands for you? Heiran looked at them with a sneer, would he dare to use a thief to run errands? The two thieves burst into tears and said, Master, we have no choice but to be thieves. We have an 80-year-old mother and a baby waiting to be fed. You are only 20 at most, so your mother was born in her 60s, Fanzijan sighed lightly, your mother is really old, and she is in excellent health. You are still thieves in such a family background. The two immediately choked and couldn't speak. Aristocrats with superior living conditions rarely live to be 80, let alone folks. Therefore, people who can live to this age generally do not live too hard. Heiran kicked their buttocks, and said, if you don't tell the truth, I will peel your skin. The two immediately said, Gentlemen, please forgive me. We actually don't have a mother, not even a wife, let alone a child, but we really have no choice but to steal money. Both of them were refugees who came here 3 years ago. They usually do odd jobs for others and occasionally steal. They have their own gang, which is full of refugees. They go back to steal money because they are hungry, and they don't dare to steal from the locals, otherwise they will be driven out of the town. Therefore, they always aim at passing travelers and businessmen. They don't steal too much every time, they only take a little and leave. Therefore, although the stolen person is angry, they don't deliberately stay and pursue it. Such things often don't happen. Let it go. There are only 16 adults in their gang, but they have to support 27 children and 8 elderly people. They can't get enough to eat every day, and there are very few odd jobs in the small town, and the locals prefer to hire locals first. Hire them, and the wages will be kept to a minimum. In order to survive, they can only steal. Seeing that Chihayran couldn't bear it, Fanzijan snorted coldly and said, The sky is big and the earth is big, you have healthy limbs, don't talk about those reasons, it's a mistake to steal. Chihayran immediately sternly said, Master will verify what you said, if it is true, you can save your life, if it is still a lie. Chihayran sneered. He and Fanzijan were just scaring people before, and didn't intend to kill them, but if they cheated again and again, he didn't mind punching them a few more times. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1397. There are also several gangs among the refugees, and usually fellow villagers get together to support and help each other. And the two little thieves are from Sinyuan Mansion. They followed their family members and went south 3 years ago to escape the war disaster. But during the escape, their parents, brothers, and sisters died of starvation, sickness, and they were the only ones who came here alive. They came here 3 years ago, but they have been on the road for 3 years. Although they look like 20-year-olds, they are actually only 16 years old this year, and they look old because of fatigue. Their parents starved to death on the road, and they had to rely on their fellow villagers to help them survive. Therefore, when they grow up, they have to take care of those who are younger than them or who are already old and weak. According to the two people, there were about 300 people who escaped from Sinyuan Mansion, but those who dragged their families left here, and many left overwhelmed. Now they are the only ones left. They also left, and those children and old people probably couldn't survive. It's not that no one has ever been beaten to death or injured for stealing, but compared with hunger, the fear of being beaten to death seems to be less. But no matter how young the two were, they didn't want to die. They looked at the two teenagers pitifully, and only hoped that they would show mercy and let them go. Chihayran ignored them. Fanzijan had a low fever, he knocked them unconscious and stuffed them under the bed, opened the door and asked Xiao'er to help invite the doctor, and then brought hot porridge to Fanzijan. Fanzijan waved his paws, took the bowl by himself, and said, Don't be kind, even if what they said is true, it's none of our business, at most we let them go and don't pursue this matter. Chihayran scratched his head and nodded heavily. Fanzijan has always been cautious. Now that he is sick and staying here, he naturally doesn't want to let him go and let the wind out, so the two of them have been locked in the room. Chihayran loosens their blood from time to time. Seeing that the two young masters had no intention of killing them, they were very obedient and would not cry or make trouble, and sometimes they would take the initiative to serve Fanzijan who was sick. There is no way. Fanzijan and Chihayran are both people who stretch out their clothes to eat and open their mouths. Now that he is sick, he has to boil medicine, drink water from time to time, and pay attention to cooling down. Chihayran is in a hurry. And the two little thieves have experience in taking care of children. After serving them twice with trepidation, Chi simply untied them to make it easier for them to take care of them. Fan Zijian saw that they didn't run away without screaming, raised his eyebrows slightly, and felt better about them. After thinking about it, he took out 2 big silver ingots from his purse and threw them at them, saying, "My cousin and I didn't take it with us when we went out. Man, now that I am sick again, if you take good care of me, these 2 ingots of silver will be rewarded to you, but if you have any other tricks," he said with a faint smile, "you have seen my cousin's ability, you don't want to meet again, do you?" The 2 shuddered and shook their heads again and again. Satisfied, Fan Zijian pointed to the medicine bag on the table and said, "Go and boil the medicine." He really didn't want to see a room full of smoke anymore, he would be smoked to death by Chi if he didn't die of illness. One thief hesitated to get the medicine jar, seeing that the 2 young masters had no intention of objecting, he immediately took the medicine bag out, while the other consciously stayed to take care of Fan Zijian. Fan Zijian said to Chi in private, "It's fine if they just correct it, but if they are still thinking about it, you can't be soft-hearted." Chi nodded solemnly, and Fan Zijian went to sleep to recuperate at ease. He was groggy all day long, and this matter was always on his mind, so he couldn't rest well at all. The 2 little thieves seemed to have calmed down and followed behind the 2 of them to serve them. When they slept at night, they also obediently huddled in the chair, not daring to move. Fan Zijian's illness made them stay in the small town for 3 days, and the 2 thieves neither went back to report the news, nor came to them. Fan Zijian asked curiously, "If you don't go back, they don't worry about it, are you?" The 2 little thieves said calmly, "They may think that we have left, and we usually don't look for people who leave. If something happens, the town is so big, and they will definitely hear the news." Fan Zijian nodded knowingly. The 2 of them hardly passed by outside. Their accomplices probably thought they couldn't stand the pressure and left. At this time, he felt a little sympathetic to them, and suggested, "You can't go on like this, you can't even support yourself by doing odd jobs, let alone raising so many children and the elderly. Theft is fine for a while, and accidents will inevitably happen after a long time. Didn't you also say that someone was caught and beaten to death for stealing?" Both little thieves lowered their heads and remained silent. This was the best way they could think of to protect most people. "There are only 2 ways for you to survive, one is to buy property here and have a long-term livelihood, and the other is to continue migrating west or south, where there are fewer wars than in the north, and the land is vast and sparsely populated. Maybe we can find a way out." The eyes of the 2 teenagers turned red, and they whispered, "My lord, we can't do both of these things. The former requires a lot of money, and the latter, we have no food, and relocating rashly will only lead to more casualties." Their previous experience is an example. They fled from Xinyuan Mansion to Jiangnan, and nearly 2/3 of them died along the way. Fan Zijian frowned, Chi tugged at his sleeve and pointed to his chest. Fan Zijian frowned even tighter, and said in disapproval, "You can't even support yourself, why are you still thinking about spreading your money?" Chi looked at it openly, shook his head and said, "I will come back after all the money is gone. Don't look at me now that I don't have the ability to make money. How do you know that I won't be able to be rich in the future?" Fan Zijian snorted and said, "Whenever you can save 100 taels of silver, I will believe what you say today." Chi immediately patted his chest and hinted, "There are more than 100 taels here. It's not what you earned. Uncle, if you know you stole so much money, you must discount your legs." "Of course I earned what came into my hands." Chi lowered his voice and said, "It's a windfall. We've been here for so many days. What do you think is the chance of us being caught back?" Fan Zijian's heart skipped a beat. Chi continued, "If we are unfortunately caught, do you think we can keep the money?" Fan Zijian was a little guilty, because they delayed the trip because of his illness. They stayed here for 3 days, buying clothes, shoes, and socks, and buying medicine to see a doctor. There were too many traces left behind. Was found. My eldest brother and I definitely don't have a share of the money in my father's hand. Since it is all reserved for Qi Shaosheng and Qi Xiaotai, then I don't spend it for nothing. Why don't I use the money to do something good before they find us? Anyway, it's for us good luck. Fan Zijin felt a little distressed when he thought of the first base bank note. That can't be such a waste of money. You can also use it on yourself. Qi Heiran never paid attention to personal enjoyment. He tried his best to persuade him, it's better than being copied by my father. If he takes away the money, it will all be in Wu's hands. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1398. With a straight face, Fan Zijin took out the silver from his pocket to pay for the food, asked people to move the food away, and took them to the bull market. After all, he couldn't resist agreeing to Qi Heiran's suggestion. As he said, they showed too many deeds, and maybe the two of them would be arrested in a few days. Cheap uncle. Once the money was in uncle's hands, Heiran and his eldest cousin would never want to spend any more money. After comprehensive consideration, instead of putting the money back into the uncle's hands, it's better to break it up. At least they can get spiritual satisfaction and a good reputation. But even if he had the idea of spending all his money, Fan Zijin still planned carefully and made sure not to waste a penny of his money. It is very expensive to buy land that can support so many people in the south of the Yangtze River. After consulting the local land prices, Fan Zijin decided to subsidize them to leave. Fan Zijin said that if they want to open up wasteland for a living in a sparsely populated place, he is willing to subsidize their travel expenses. The two teenagers went back to discuss with the adults. In fact, they didn't struggle for long before agreeing to leave here. The employment opportunities in this small town are simply not enough for them to support themselves. The reason why they have not left is that there is no food, and the other is that they are worried about these children and the elderly. Those who are willing to stay and take care of these children and the elderly are all people who have received favors from their parents and relatives. Even if they are ordinary people, they also know that a drop of water should be repaid by a spring, so as long as there is a chance, they are unwilling to discard it. These children and the elderly. Now that someone is subsidizing their travel expenses, of course they are in a hurry to agree. Knowing that it was because the two boys stole from the two sons that they attracted people, the adults and old people among the refugees were ashamed. Fan Zijin didn't take it seriously, he just wanted to get over it and leave. Although he already had a premonition that he might be arrested, he still hoped to go a little further before being arrested. As for being too embarrassing, he didn't hand over the money directly to them, but took people directly to buy enough rations for them, and then bought them 2 mules, mule carts and several carts, and went to the pharmacy to buy them some commonly used food. Finally, he gave them some broken silver and said, "These are enough for you to find the next foothold." The old people hurriedly took the children to kowtow to the two of them. Fan Zijin waved his hand, pulled Qi Heiran away. "Since we may have been discovered, then let's not take the path, but follow the official path. The path is so rugged that it could break his waist, so it's better to follow the official path." Qi Heiran nodded without any objection at all, and got on the horse with Fan Zijin and headed for the official road. The old people turned their heads and said to the children, "We want to repay our kindness. Do you remember the appearance of the two benefactors? If you have a chance in the future, you will repay them back, understand?" The children responded in unison. No one expected that opportunity to come so soon. Not long after Qi Heiran and Fan Zijin left the town, a group of people came to stop the group of refugees who were about to leave the town, took out 2 portraits and asked, "Have you seen these 3 people?" A child said yeah, and the group was shocked. looked at them with piercing eyes and asked, "Have you seen it?" An old man stepped forward, took a closer look and said, "Aren't these Mr. Fan and Mr. Chi? What are the brothers looking for them for? They are the young masters of our family. Because we got separated from them, our master is in a hurry to find them. If you can help us find them, our master will be very grateful." The old man smiled and said, "Thank you very much, there is no need, these two sons are good people. When he was sick, my two grandsons went to serve them, helped them catch and run errands, and got a big reward, but you are late, they left town early this morning." Several people looked at each other and asked, "Where did they go?" The old man smiled and pointed to the path, and said with a smile, "The two young masters seem to want to go east, but we have enough east in Jiangnan, so I said that if we go east, we will go to sea." The two young masters, they didn't speak, and the little old man didn't know exactly where they were going. Several people immediately took the portrait and said, "Thank you, old man, if we can find our young master, we will definitely reward you." After finishing speaking, he got on his horse and chased towards the path. The two teenagers beside the old man looked at him speechlessly, and the old man knocked on their heads and said, "What are you looking at? You still have a lot to learn, let's go, let's leave quickly, don't let anyone catch up." A child was stunned for a long time before he came back to his senses and shouted, "Grandpa, how can you lie to me? Young master and the others are obviously going to the official road, and Mr. Chi said that they are going to our Sinyuan mansion, and they asked it has done a lot of things for us in Sinyuan mansion." The old man patted his head lightly, and said with a straight face, "Grandpa didn't lie to them. Those are bad guys. The two young masters are kind to us. How can we let the bad guys catch the benefactor?" Someone will ask again later. If you want to mention the whereabouts of the two sons, you just say that they went to the east, understand? A group of children nodded with half understanding. Fan Zijian and Chi Heiran didn't know that the people sent by the Wu family to kill them were coaxed astray by the old man, and they didn't know that the people sent by Fan Siwen and Xia Tong to look for them had already walked far ahead of them. I showed my whereabouts in the small town, and I was afraid that I would be arrested soon, so I no longer felt the tension of rushing to die on the first day. Instead, I walked with the thought that I was going to die anyway, so I might as well enjoy it before I die. How comfortable it is along the way, stay for 2 days if you encounter something interesting, and buy food and donate if you encounter disaster victims. Chi Heiran had always spent money lavishly, and he didn't worry about how much money was given away, but Fan Zijian felt sorry for him at first, but he didn't feel bad when he thought that the money belonged to his uncle. He was even more generous in spending money than Chi Heiran. Seeing good-looking clothes to buy, seeing delicious ones to buy, seeing interesting ones to buy, seeing good books to buy, he even spent 300 taels of silver to compete with others for a painting. The two of them walked slowly towards Sinyuan mansion, completely unaware that the three parties had suffered so much to find them. By the time Fan Zijian realized something was wrong, they had already walked half the distance, and they saw that they would arrive at Sinyuan mansion in a few days. It's been almost a month. My mother should have found us even if she was a turtle, right? Why haven't we been arrested yet? Fan Zijian asked confusedly. Chi Heiran thought of a possibility, opened his mouth slightly and said, "They won't be ahead of us, will they?" The two teenagers looked at each other, and at the same time thought of the 3 days they spent on the small road recuperating in that small town. Their eyes shone brightly, and they couldn't help laughing happily. "That's great, we don't have to worry about being gutted. The reborn wife is farming." Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1399. Fan Zijian jumped off the horse wearing a hat, couldn't help but took off the fan from his pocket and fanned it, and said with a bitter face, "Why is it getting hotter and hotter? Didn't we go north?" Chi Heiran unloaded the burden from the horse, found a shady place to put it down, tied the horse aside to eat grass and had a rest. "We'll rest here at noon today, and wait for the sun to go west. Chi took out his dry food, untied his water bag, and comforted him, "I'll go into the woods for a while and have a look. Can we catch some prey? If we can, we will eat wild game at night." Fan Zijian nodded wearily, and said, "Let's count the money on us first. I thought we would be arrested and spend money without restraint. Since the person chasing us ran ahead of us, the probability of us being arrested is very high. We need to save some money in the future, and don't think about spending money on supporting those refugees. We have to save some for ourselves." Sullenly, Chi took out the oiled paper bag on his chest and handed it to him, and poured out the silver ingots in the pouch. Fan Zijian counted the banknotes and sighed, "This money is too wasteful. In less than a month, there were only 10,000 taels left, and there were not many silver ingots." Fan Zijian counted and it was only 120. He wrapped the banknotes and stuffed them back into Chi arms, and said solemnly, "In the future, we won't use banknotes anymore, only using these silver ingots. We will definitely be able to find Big Cousin in Xingzhou Mansion." Seeing Chi reluctance, Fan Zijian said, "I heard that my eldest cousin has to rely on himself to support the army, and the food and salaries given by the court are not enough at all. Why don't we leave the 10,000 taels to my eldest cousin, and we will travel thousands of miles to join him? It's not good that he can't take out any gift." Chi agreed when he heard it, nodded in agreement, put the banknote next to his body, and then stuffed the silver ingot into the bag and threw it aside. The two of them were so casual about the money that those who watched from a distance on the mountain gritted their teeth. The rich are different, so much money is just thrown aside so casually. A burly man wiped his knife and said with a sneer, "That's because they have more money in their pockets, the ones on the ground are nothing to mention." He gave a condescending glance, put away the knife and said, "Go, be careful, that young man with a white face is very smart, don't let him see the flaws. You have seen the kung fu of that young man with a round face. It won't be a problem to knock down 40 or 50 of us." After finishing speaking, he turned his blade, and said with a cold face, "If the whereabouts are revealed, they may not kill us, but the master knows that the matter will be exposed and will definitely use our blood to sacrifice the flag." Everyone felt chilled, and immediately became extremely cautious. Yuniang in the team even grabbed her daughter's arm fiercely, and whispered, "Cry when mother tells you to cry." Fan Zijian and Chi at the foot of the mountain were completely unaware of the danger coming. They were lucky today, and Chi took out a big pheasant after walking around half a circle. Chi hung the pheasant on the branch with a smile, and said proudly, "We will eat this at night." Fan Zijian couldn't help smiling, but before his smile fell, he saw Chi frowning and looking towards the road. Fan Zijian followed his gaze and asked, "What's wrong? I heard yelling and crying." Fan Zijian listened carefully and found that he didn't hear anything, but he didn't doubt Chi judgment, thought for a while and said, "Look at me for a while, don't intervene decisively." Chi nodded solemnly. Soon, a group of people appeared at the corner of the road. Two burly men with knives drove an old woman, a young woman and a little girl to the side. Both of them frowned slightly. Needless to say, Chi couldn't help but move his fingers when he saw the two burly men pushing the old woman forward fiercely, but he still looked at Fan Zijian, waiting for his decision. Fan Zijian also frowned fiercely. If he encountered such a thing in the capital, he probably would not have seen it. However, in the past month, he has been doing good deeds and helping others almost every day. Seeing the habit of drawing swords to help when injustice is unavoidable. At this time, it is unacceptable to see the old and weak women and children being bullied by two burly men with big knives in their hands. He glanced at Chi who had the same eyebrows, and waved casually, "Go and rescue him." Chi rushed forward immediately, and a swallow turned around and flew in front of them. He didn't land at all, and kicked out with both feet, kicking the two big men with big knives flying out. The old woman and Yunyang, mother and daughter, were stunned, and they sat down on the ground and stared at Chi Heiran dumbfounded. Chi Heiran landed in front of them, and sneered at the two strong men. "I saved their young master, why don't you get out?" The two strong men held their chests and shouted, "You young man is so unreasonable. They owed us money, but they wanted to send them back to repay the debt, and they didn't want to kill them. Why should we be guilty?" Chi Heiran stared, and was about to curse, when he saw another strong man raised his eyebrows and said, "It's only natural to pay debts, and we are justified wherever we go. How can you beat people without asking indiscriminately?" Chi Heiran blushed, turned to look at them, and asked, "You really owe them money?" The old woman nodded timidly, and said, "I owe 5 taels, but they charge 20 taels for rolling interest. Our family can only make up 5 taels, how can we get 20 taels? They want to take us going to the city, they said they would sell us for money." The old woman had already lived enough, and she sold it, and I only pitied my daughter-in-law and granddaughter, their lives would also be ruined. Yunyang covered her face and cried, and gently pinched the daughter in her arms, and the little girl in her arms also cried loudly with wow. Chi Heiran's heart softened immediately, and hesitantly looked in Fan Zijian's direction. It was right to pay back the debt. Although Chi Heiran didn't like the two strong men, he couldn't beat them away like this, but the 3 of them were indeed pitiful. Fan Zijian could understand what Chi Heiran was thinking just by looking at Chi Heiran's eyes. He rolled his eyes secretly, took out an ingot of 20 taels of silver from his bag, and asked, "Why do you owe them 5 taels of silver?" "Because my son was seriously ill before and had no money to buy medicine." The old woman had the courage to borrow money, but she didn't know that her son was not saved in the end, and she took the family with her. After speaking, she wept. During this period of time, Fan Zijian had been in contact with the people at the lowest level, so he naturally knew that the poor people could not afford to be sick or die, otherwise it would not be the same as before, and they would definitely fall to the lowest ebb. He carefully observed the faces of the two strong men, and seeing that there was no difference, he believed it in his heart. And the two strong men also said angrily, "We agreed on the interest rate before you borrowed the money, but we made an agreement with you. Since you want to borrow, you should think about how to pay it back. It was also agreed at that time if you can't afford it, you can pay it yourself. Why do you have to be in such a mournful state now?" "Okay," Fan Zijian said with a sneer, "isn't it just 20 taels? I'll pay it for them." After finishing speaking, he threw the silver ingot in his hand to them, stretched out his hand and said, "Where is the IOU?" The two strong men bit the silver ingot to make sure it was real, and then returned the IOU to him. Fan Zijian saw that the writing on it was crooked, and the borrower below had only a fingerprint, so he showed it to the old woman, and he was sure it was them. The IOU was burned on the spot. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1400. The two strong men took the silver ingots and left contentedly. The old woman kowtowed to Fan Zijian and Chi Heiran 3 times in gratitude, and wiped her tears and said, "The great kindness of the two young masters, we can't repay it even if we are cattle and horses." She turned around and grabbed her daughter-in-law and granddaughter, and said, "Quickly kowtow to the two benefactors." Chi Heiran hurriedly helped him up, touched his head honestly and said, "It's nothing, it's just a matter of 20 taels, he he. Among the money they spend on helping others, this is the least amount." Fan Zijian didn't take the money seriously either, and waved his hand, "Go back, old man, we're just doing it with a little effort." Seeing them sitting in the shade under the tree to enjoy the shade, the old woman immediately said, "You two benefactors, the sun is too strong, and my house is not far from there. If you don't mind it, you might as well go to my house to rest for a while, and let my daughter-in-law give it to you. Pick a watermelon and eat it." The old woman said with a smile, "It's not too late to start when the weather isn't too hot." Chi Heiran and Fan Zijian hesitated for a moment, It seemed really nice to have watermelon on such a hot day. The two teenagers immediately packed up their salutes and led the horses to follow them. The old woman's house was in a forest after the road turned. If there was no old woman leading them, they really would not have found a house here. The old woman said with a smile, "My husband is a hunter. Our family is the only one within a 5-mile radius. Usually, few people come here. The house is a bit rough. Don't mind my benefactors. It is indeed very simple, there is not even a decent stool in the room, and there is an old and worn-out quilt on the kong against the wall, but the room is very clean." Little Mazza sat on it. The old woman immediately asked her daughter-in-law to pick and cut watermelons. She smiled and said, "Our family has been hunting for a living. It was only after my son got sick that I started to grow some melons and fruits. This year's watermelons haven't been picked yet. The two benefactors, let's taste it for a while and see if it's delicious." As the old woman spoke, she went to the kitchen to get some food, and Uniang quickly brought in the cut watermelon. Fanzijin first picked up a piece and gave it to the little girl standing beside her with her mouth in her mouth. Uniang took it with a smile and put it in the basin, and said with a smile, "Benefactors, eat it. If this child wants to eat, I will pick it for her." Fanzijin raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, "This watermelon is big enough, and little sister should try it too, otherwise my cousin and I won't be able to finish it." Uniang's face froze, she laughed dryly, took a slice of watermelon and stuffed it into her daughter's hand, pushed her and said, "Why don't you thank benefactor soon?" The little girl thanked timidly, and stood aside holding the watermelon, not daring to eat it. Uniang said, "You two benefactors, you eat, and I will go to the kitchen to have a look." Fanzijin nodded and looked at the little girl after seeing her gone, and asked with a smile, "Why don't you eat? Don't you like it?" The little girl lowered her head and gnawed carefully. Fanzijin looked at it for a while, and then began to eat with confidence. Chi-Heiran looked at him, then at the little girl, and also buried himself in hard work. It was hot, really hot. Everyone ate 2 or 3 slices, knowing that watermelon should not be eaten too much, so they all stopped, and the old woman and Uniang quickly brought in 2 bowls of porridge and 2 plates of sauerkraut, and said apologetically, "There is nothing at home that can be sold, the 2 benefactors can barely use it." Just as Fanzijin was about to decline, Uniang had already led her daughter out, and only the old woman and them were left in the room. The old woman looked at them with a guilty face, and Fanzijin's face turned red. He was still not very good at rejecting people, so nodding his head, he said, "I'm sorry for the trouble, old man." He took out a piece of silver from his pocket and stuffed it into her hand, saying, "Your family is in a difficult situation, you can use the silver to do some small business." The old woman looked at the silver in her hand, opened her mouth, wiped her eyes and said, "Thank you 2 benefactors for your kindness." She blessed the 2 of them, and then retreated wiping away tears. Chi-Heiran felt baffled, why did she leave us behind? Fanzijin sighed, "I'm so moved that I don't know what to say. Staying here is just embarrassing." He tapped Chi-Heiran's bowl with his chopsticks and said, "Hurry up and eat. After we're done, we'll ask them for 2 watermelons and leave." Chi-Heiran nodded when he heard this. He really felt a little hungry. He didn't have any appetite for dry food on a hot day. Now there is clear porridge with sauerkraut, which is really refreshing. The bowl was not big, and Chi-Heiran would eat it after a few mouthfuls, and then ate the sauerkraut with his chopsticks. Fanzijin held the bowl and tasted it slowly, so when he was a little dizzy, he was in a trance for a moment, and his hand was unsteady, and the bowl fell from his hand and hit the table. He grabbed Chi-Heiran, shook his head and said, "Heiran, I seem to have a heat stroke." After a while, feeling this kind of dizziness worsened, looking at the overlapping dishes on the table, Fanzijin's heart moved, and his face changed drastically. "No, it's not heat stroke, yes, It's something on the table. Chi-Heiran stood up in shock, but his eyes went dark, and he lay down on the table. Fan Zijian felt a chill in his heart, and couldn't hold on and fell to the ground. The people outside heard the movement inside and rushed in immediately. Yu Niang kicked the two people who had passed out, then turned to the old woman and said, "Go get the rope." "No need, I'll tie it up myself." The two burly men walked in, saw Chi-Heiran lying on the table, grinned grinningly, stepped forward and gave him a kick, and saw him being kicked down limply on the ground. He felt the anger in his heart subside a little. "Okay, hurry up and find the things. The boss is still waiting for us to go back. The identities of these two people should not be simple, so don't reveal their whereabouts. Don't worry, when the time comes, the people will be cut into pieces and buried separately. Don't say that those people can't find their bodies. Even if they find them, they won't be able to recognize them." These two teenagers went all the way north from the south of the Yangtze River, and rescued many victims on the way. There was a lot of commotion, and they could tell that they were hiding people. Others may not know who they are hiding from, but their base camp is in Xinzhou Prefecture. 2 days ago, someone came to their door and spent 1,000 taels to buy the heads of these two people. Knowing that these two people are so far behind the people who chased them down, Qian Liang made them so tempted to send so many people, and these two teenagers also brought so much money with them. Seeing how generously they helped the victims, they must have a lot of money. The people who bribed them even wanted to deceive them, saying that they wanted everything on them. Did they play them for fools? The strong man stepped forward to search the two of them, and took out an oil paper bag from Chi-Heiran's arms at once. When he opened it, the eyes of the people in the room were all straightened, and they counted with shaking hands, swallowing and saying, "This is 10,000 taels. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1401. Chi-Heiran was thrown on the ground, and his back hurt when he hit the firewood on the ground, but he didn't even wrinkle his brows. He only opened his eyes when he heard the sound of closing doors and footsteps fading away. But he was still weak in his hands and feet. Seeing Fan Zijian lying aside, he couldn't help but bumped into him with his body, but the other party didn't respond at all. It seemed that he was really dizzy. Chi-Heiran was dizzy, dry-mouthed, and extremely uncomfortable. He felt that it would be better if he really passed out, at least it would be more comfortable, but the only remaining will told him that if he really passed out, maybe the other party would still die. If they really would dismantle them into several pieces and bury them separately, they would die a terrible death. Chi-Heiran closed his eyes, and thought of various ways, but there was no solution to this situation. After all, he had been poisoned by some kind of poison, and now his hands and feet were weak, let alone escaped, and he couldn't even break free from the rope on his body. Chi-Heiran was so anxious that he was sweating profusely. For the first time, he felt the feeling of being a fish. Chi-Heiran was so anxious that he was about to cry, while the people in the other room were discussing the distribution of spoils. The boss and they didn't expect that the other party still had so many banknotes, and the harvest was greater than expected. They are not good men and women, so they naturally want to seek some benefits for themselves. Except for Yuniang's daughter, the other 4 people present are all in the ranks of dividing up the spoils. At least they can't let the wind out. However, how much to divide, how much to keep, and how to divide it is a big problem, because the money is too much, so everyone didn't have the heart to deal with Chi-Heiran and Fan Zijian, and hurriedly tied them up and threw them in the firewood room before dividing up the spoils. This also bought time for Chi-Heiran and Fan Zijian, but it didn't help much, because Chi-Heiran couldn't think of a good way, so he could only fall on Fan Zijian, whispering in his ear. Called him, hoping to wake him up. Fan Zijian only ate half a bowl of porridge, which contained less drugs than Chi-Heiran, but he was not in good health, so he passed out first, but at this time Chi-Heiran tirelessly harassed him, and he couldn't sleep well, so he struggled to open his mouth. Eyes. Chi-Heiran was overjoyed, and said in a low voice, "Zijin, we were poisoned and tied up, I have no strength at all, and they still want to kill us, what should we do?" Fan Zijin's mind cleared up a little, he felt the condition of his body, and said hoarsely, "It seems to be sweat medicine. It's a drug that makes people's hands and feet weak. Don't you know Kung Fu to force out the poison?" Chi-Heiran was dumbfounded, and said, "I haven't learned this yet." Fan Zijin was dizzy. He put his head on the cool ground, and after regaining consciousness, he said, "Then force the sweat out. The drug mixed with the body fluid will naturally be excreted." Chi-Heiran hurriedly closed his eyes, mobilized the internal force in his abdomen with difficulty. Fan Zijin said intermittently, Don't be too hasty, you will die if you lose too much water, slowly force the sweat out." Chi-Heiran was sweating all over in a short while. Just as he was about to continue his efforts, a voice came from outside, "I'll go in now and chop those two boys off the road." Chi-Heiran opened his eyes flashed brightly, he didn't dare to wait any longer, he was sweating all over his body now, he knew something was up when he saw it, he couldn't pretend at all, let alone people came to kill them, if he pretended he would die. Therefore, Chi-Heiran violently broke the ropes on his body, but he only recovered 30% of his strength, and the sudden release of internal strength still made his eyes go dark, but the footsteps had already reached the door, and he dared not delay. As soon as Fan Zijin was picked up, he jumped up, broke through the thatched roof, tapped his feet, and flew towards the woods at the other end of the thatched house. The two strong men were taken aback for a moment, and then shouted, "They have escaped, catch them quickly." They raised their knives and chased after them. Chi-Heiran ran in the direction where they tethered the horse, but he knew it was not good when he entered the woods. The horse that was tethered here to rest and hide from the sun did not know where it went. He heard the chasing sound from behind, and he felt feeling dizzy before his eyes, he didn't dare to stay any longer. He gritted his teeth, hugged Fan Zijin and flew towards the depths of the woods. Fan Zijin not only felt dizzy, but also nauseated, but seeing Chi-Heiran's pale face and dripping with cold sweat, he knew that he was not well, so he didn't dare to reveal too much, so he could only bite his lip and let him run for his life in the woods. The two strong men knew the way outside, but they were not very familiar with the woods. The most important thing was that they didn't dare to go deep, so after chasing for a while, they couldn't see them, so they could only turn around bitterly. They knew that the identities of the two people were not simple, and it would be bad if they let people get away this time, so they hurried back to discuss with the big boss, and send more people to arrest them. And Chi-Heiran, who was jumping forward with a dull head, finally became unstable when he flew to a branch and fell down. He hurriedly hugged Fan Zijin in his arms and rolled to the ground, rolled 7 or 8 steps straight, and directly hit a tree branch. It stopped on the tree. Fortunately, Chi-Heiran's back hit the tree, and Fan Zijin was well protected by him, otherwise the delicate and frail Fan Zijin would have lost half of his life if he was hit like this. Fan Zijin was drugged a lot, shook his head, and said in a low voice, "Untie my rope." Chi-Heiran moved his hands and found that he didn't have much strength. He could only move and lean against the tree, and it took a long time to untie the knot. Fan Zijin immediately broke free from the rope, climbed to Chi-Heiran's side, and put the person on the ground for inspection. His upper body and back were bruised, and he breathed a sigh of relief. But seeing the obvious blue and purple footprints on his waist, he was angry and hated, and said, "If these liars fall into my hands, I will make their life worse than death." Chi-Heiran shook his hand, wanted to speak but couldn't even speak. Seeing the panic, Fan Zijin quickly went to check his face, and said hesitantly after a while, "You seem to be short of water, did you sweat too much just now?" Chi-Heiran looked at Fanzaijan pitifully. Fanzaijan could only stand up unsteadily, and said, "I'll go get you some water." After taking 2 steps, he came back and said, "Let's take you there. You have no power to protect yourself now. What if you stay here and get caught by wolves?" As he spoke, he carried Chi-Heiran on his back with difficulty, dragged him in a random direction, and walked away. An experienced hunter would be speechless when he saw this. Walking around in the woods like this not only could not find the water source, but also easily lost his way. In the end, he would either be eaten by wild beasts in the mountains, or be completely lost in the forest and never come out. However, this convention does not apply to Fanzaijan and Chi-Heiran, because they are lucky. Fanzaijan dragged Chi-Heiran away for half an hour, and after he was almost exhausted, he finally saw a small stream, and hurriedly dragged him over. Fanzaijan put Chi-Heiran by the water, took the water and poured it into his mouth. At this time, why did he care about whether he was clean? Chi-Heiran took 2 sips, regained his strength slightly, then turned over to drink by himself. Fanzaijan also drank a lot, and then wiped his mouth and said, "Our luck is too bad, not only were we deceived, but even I can hardly find my saliva." Chi-Heiran, who didn't know that his luck was off the charts, nodded with empathy, "Did I use up all my good luck before?" The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1402. The 2 teenagers drank the water and fell down beside the water, only recovering after their bodies were covered in sticky sweat. Chi-Heiran could immediately take off his clothes and take a bath, but Fanzaijan didn't dare. His body is weak, and he would get sick if he gets cold or exposed to the sun. If he took a bath in the cool stream in the evening, he wouldn't have to get up tomorrow. So he could only resist not using a handkerchief to wash his face with water, and wipe his hands and neck. Chi-Heiran's family figured out where they fell, held hands tightly and said, "Let's go out to find them, this time I must let them know how powerful they are." Fanzaijan threw down the handkerchief and said, "They know us so well, they don't know how long they have been observing in secret. Since they let us escape, how could they still stay where they are and wait for you to find them?" Chi-Heiran furrowed his eyebrows fiercely, then immediately knelt down and picked up Fanzaijan on his back, saying, "We'll go look for them right away, maybe we can catch up." Fanzaijan hugged Chi-Heiran's neck and nodded, and said briskly, "Okay, let's go." Chi-Heiran uses running and flying, and his speed is very fast. Fanzaijan lowered his head to hide from the wind. While thinking about this incident, he finally knew where he was wrong. They trust people too easily, but no one thought that the old woman like a refugee would lie to them. You must know that they have helped many people along the way. Those people are grateful to them and taught them a lot. They avoided many detours. Because for the past month, he has been in a friendly atmosphere where there is help and feedback, so although he is vigilant, he is not so vigilant. The most dangerous things they encountered along the way were robbery and theft, but no matter whether it was the former or the latter, he didn't need to worry about them. Often those people were beaten down by Heiran as soon as they appeared, and sometimes he didn't even have to move his butt. The battle is over after watching the battle with disdain. It turns out that there are shameless things like cheating in this world. Fanzaijan was concerned, and only came back to his senses when Chi-Heiran stopped. Looking around, he found that they were surrounded by dense trees. He was dumbfounded and asked, "Where is this?" Chi-Heiran tilted his head and said, "I don't know." Fanzaijan, who was on his back, couldn't help raising his hand to pat him on the head, and said angrily, "Don't tell me you're lost." Chi-Heiran said weakly, I obviously walked in the opposite direction from the way we entered the forest, so I should have been outside a long time ago." But he didn't go out after running for a long time. Seeing the afterglow of the sun disappear, he felt a faint sense of danger in his heart, so he stopped. Fanzaijan jumped off Chi-Heiran's back, looked around with his brows together, and finally said, "I can't tell the direction either, so I can only talk about it later, when I can tell the position of the stars. Chi-Heiran silently looked up at the dense leaves with only a little gap left above his head, and a faint light was projected from between the trees to the ground. Following Fan Zijian, who looked up. Fan Zijian said irritably, "Then what do you say? How about I take you to the top of the tree to see?" Fan Zijian stared at him without speaking. That's right, Zijian might not be able to stand on the top of a tree, let alone watch the stars from above. Alarm bells rang in his heart, and his face changed uncontrollably. When they went hunting in the mountains before, the guards repeatedly emphasized that they must not get lost in the mountains, otherwise they would not only be attacked by ferocious beasts, but also get lost in the mountains and never get out for a lifetime. Now, Chi-Heiran raised his heart high and felt that the danger was getting closer and closer to him. Before he had time to think about it, he hugged Fan Zijian and jumped up the tree. He didn't stop until he jumped onto the last branch that was slightly bigger. Down. Fan Zijian's face turned pale, and he held Chi-Heiran tightly, thinking that he was going to take him up to the treetops to watch the stars, and he was going to scold him immediately. Didn't he know that he was afraid of looking down from a height? Chi-Heiran covered his mouth and said in a low voice, "Don't move." Almost as soon as Chi-Heiran's words fell, the two roe deer ran rampant in this direction. When Fan Zijian saw clearly what was chasing behind, he couldn't help but gasped. A blind bear pinned down a roe deer with a few vertical leaps and bit off its neck almost effortlessly. The bloody smell soon permeated. Even though they were hiding in a tall tree, Fan Zijian thought he could smell a faint fishy smell. Chi-Heiran felt relieved. The smell of blood could cover up their smell, although he thought he was powerful, but he didn't have a bow and arrow, not even a dagger at this time, so he didn't dare to confront a blind bear while carrying Fan Zijian. Xiangxiazi slowly ate up the prey, leaving a pile of internal organs, then roared twice to the sky, and began to look for the next prey. Seeing blind Xiang turn away, Chi-Heiran lowered his head and thought for a while, "We may have gone in the wrong direction. This is going to the deep forest." Blind Xiang is also afraid of people, so he seldom goes out of the deep forest. Just now when the roe deer was being chased, he subconsciously went here. Running, maybe we can get out here. Fan Zijian stared at him for a long time, then asked suspiciously, "Are you sure? Anyway, we can't recognize the direction, why don't we try?" Fan Zijian held him tightly, closed his eyes and said, "It's up to you, anyway, I can't walk anymore, so you have to carry me on your back." Chi-Heiran had no objection at all. The little friend would dawdle on flat roads, let alone rushing in the woods. The roots on the ground could trip him up. Chi-Heiran didn't hesitate. He put Fan Zijian on his back and flew towards the direction where the roe deer had just left. Chi-Heiran no longer rushed forward this time, but stopped for a while after running for a while, and changed directions based on his intuition and hunting experience in the past 3 or 4 years. With tears streaming down their faces, they finally came out alive. At this time, the sky was full of stars. Fan Zijian squinted his eyes to identify the direction, and said, "The thatched cottage is in that direction, let's go and have a look. Although people may leave, but I will definitely feel uncomfortable if I don't take a look." Chi-Heiran ran towards the direction set by Fan Zijian, and then saw the thatched cottage among the embers, and the two of them were completely dumbfounded. The previous 3 thatched huts and a small courtyard were completely burned down, leaving only a few yellow and black mud walls. Chi-Heiran's face was black. He stepped forward to touch the ashes, and said, "It's only warm, it hasn't burned for long. Can you catch up with people?" "They must have set fire to it and ran away." Chi-Heiran looked around, and said, "And the traces are so chaotic, I don't know where they went." Fan Zijian kicked the stone next to him angrily, squatted on the ground angrily and said, "Without horses and money, how can we travel?" Chi-Heiran scratched his head, glanced at himself, and finally pointed to the clothes on his body. "Why don't you pawn the clothes? Didn't those refugees say that clothes can be exchanged for money? These clothes are good, and you can buy them for money. Put on Gabu clothes. Fanzijan snorted, and began to search for things on his body, and finally found that he was much luckier than Chihayran, perhaps because the banknote was hidden on Chihayran's body, so they didn't search Fanzijan's body much, and he took the jade pendant hanging from his waist. He took it off and said, "I still have this left." His eyes scanned the ashes-filled room, and he asked hopefully, "Do you think they missed our luggage in a hurry?" Fanzijan bought a lot of valuables along the way. Except for calligraphy and paintings that cannot be preserved, some jade and other things may be spared. After all, it is only the fire of thatch, so jade should not be damaged, right?